Yes, today's special guest, of course, is someone that a lot of people in our circle know well, someone a lot of us are big fans of, and it's a treat to have him on the air with us here today from the OBS studios, formerly known as Lincoln Page. The man himself, soon to be retiring in exactly 1 week's time at the annual SCI tournament. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the one and only Daniel Makabe to the stream. Dan, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Sorry, yeah. I would say, thank you for having me. Sorry I'm late, everybody.
No worries.
I was training for the big match in a week's time and lost track of time. So
it's your show today. Like, we are here for you, and we're just glad to be able to share this time with you, especially so close to such a momentous event in your career. The final momentous event, as it were.
Most likely. There's an asterisk. There's an asterisk that we're all aware of, obviously. So
sure. Is it just like the standard "it's pro wrestling" asterisk, or is there more that we need to unpack there?
Oh no, it's Bryan Danielson. Bryan Danielson's the asterisk.
Oh, okay. If he
Bryan
comes calling,
if he comes calling, I will come back for one match with Bryan Danielson. But
that's fair.
Barring that, July 12th, next Friday, will be my last professional wrestling match ever. Yeah.
So I have to ask, because you brought it up, and I did list it down among my questions. We know that you are a meticulous pre-gamer for your matches.
Yes.
And I'm sure
Who shared that with the world a couple weeks ago, I'm sure.
He did, and we'll be getting into it a little more later. But I just wanted to ask, it's been pitched a million times by fans online at this point. Have you thought about potential ideas for a Danielson match?
Oh, like actual, like what we would even do?
Yeah, like literal, like spots, things of how you would approach it. Is that a thing that's run through your mind?
No. I typically don't start thinking of specific ideas for opponents until like a match is locked in. And then like I focus on whatever the match at hand is. Usually it's like whatever the next like 3 or 4 matches are, I'll have kind of game plans like kind of running through my brain. So, but no, unless something's like actually like official, I typically don't.
What are the conditions you would most like to have the Danielson match in? Like, would you do it on TV in front of the big arena? Do you want it in a small room? How do you envision it in its ideal state?
Small room, absolutely small room, independent. I don't think he would want to do it on television either, though. Like, I think he's looking for an excuse to have fun, right?
Sure,
like,
yes.
He got to do his Arena Mexico excursion, right, and wrestle Blue Panther, right? He hasn't had like an indie match in like 15 years or something absurd like that, right? So I think he kind of wants like a little refresher on his roots, right? So no, like ideal would be like 200 people maximum.
Hell yeah.
In like a very small room, not unlike, you know, like the TW Arena or the H2O building in New Jersey, or, you know, I mean, RIP, but like the 321 building in Seattle was like perfect for like intimacy for me. And there's other rooms like Prestige in Portland runs a building called the Hawthorne Theater. That's quite small and intimate. Like you're right on top of the fans, basically. Something like that would be ideal. But like if it has to be slightly bigger than that, like 1,000 people in the room, I can live with that.
You'd compromise, yeah.
I compromise. If you want to run like a big concert venue, like like Prestige runs Roseland in Portland, or there's a venue up here in Vancouver called the Commodore Ballroom that's similar size. There's a venue in Seattle, like, where Defy runs, Washington Hall's a similar size. So, I mean, there are nice venues along that size here in the Northwest that would make an ideal spot for that as well. So
distribute the footage via DVD release, of course.
I would love not streaming live.
Yeah.
Like not
Make the nerds wait like they used to.
Man, I don't miss those days, but yeah, I definitely can like pull rank as like an old man who did have to live through those days,
Yeah.
who like had to send like money orders in the mail to get VHS tapes like 4 to 6 weeks later or whatever. Yeah.
Um, yeah, so that is a dream, of course. The asterisk, we shall see one day,
Yeah.
perhaps.
Maybe.
Perhaps.
If
Um,
not, that's okay. Here's the thing. If not,
yeah.
that's okay too. That's okay too. I've learned to not be precious about anything or any match. Like this whole run. I mean, literally, the last 5 years have all been cherry on top stuff for me, right?
Yes.
None of this was ever expected, ever, 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 ever. So, like I'm very happy that I'm able to go out on my own terms and have decided like what my final match is, when it's going to be. It wasn't like, oh, I'm hurt, I'm done, which I feel for guys, like Alex Coughlin or, guys like in those situations who are just sort of like, hey, sorry, I can't do this anymore. And realistically, should I have pulled a, hey, I'm sorry, I can't do this anymore, like 2 years ago? Probably. But I'm glad that I didn't, because this is a lot more satisfying for sure. And artistically fulfilling. So, but yeah, I'm not precious about anything. If the Danielson match never happens, that's okay. So,
Yeah, so let's take it back to the beginning. And the beginning for
Link,
you was
Lincoln Page.
no, not even. We'll go further back than Lincoln Page. We'll go
Okay.
to WrestleMania 7,
Yes.
the first show you ever watched.
Yes.
And you said on the Defiant Ones podcast that your guy was the Ultimate Warrior. And
Truly.
I must note that, of course, WrestleMania 7 is Warrior versus Savage, if I'm not wrong. Um,
Retirement match. Yep.
yes. Oh, I didn't even put that together. Another retirement match, Warrior versus Savage.
Well, I mean, Savage was just going away to have kids with Elizabeth, although
Sure.
that didn't end up happening. But yes, in theory, yeah, retirement match.
Do you have memories of that particular match? Like, that's your first time watching Ultimate Warrior. What makes it stand out?
I mean, like, I think Savage gives him something like 4 or 5 top rope elbow drops that
Yes.
he then proceeds to kick out of.
Yeah.
So I'm sure, like, I wasn't even. It was a few weeks before my 7th birthday, so I would have been 6 at the time, and I probably was just going crazy, like, for that kick out. I haven't watched the match back in years, or that pay-per-view in general in years. It's an okay show, I think. It's got a good Rockers hot open against Barbarian and Haku, I think. But yeah, I was instantly hooked. I'm sure my parents were not thrilled that it was like an innocuous thing, like my dad needed something to do to like kill some time. It was like, oh, this is a fun thing we can do on a Sunday afternoon. Let's go watch WrestleMania. And then it was on, and here we are. What's that? Almost 33 years later, and it's the addiction has never waned in those 33 years. So
It really doesn't. And next thing you know,
no.
their kids taking bumps into water beds, having permanent scars. Do you want to tell
Did I
that?
tell that story on Defiant Ones
I'm
too?
pretty sure you did tell that one on Defiant Ones. You can share it for the people here.
Did I tell about the matching scars or just the
You
one?
did do the matching scars.
Yeah, so I've got matching scars on my upper lip. Which this is probably sharing too much, but like I'm an open book. Like my now wife, but at the time girlfriend, when I told her the story of the matching scars, a couple weeks into dating her, and when she first met me, she thought I might have herpes because of how gnarly, how nasty. Like if you actually meet me in person, they're pretty noticeable, the scars on my upper lips. So, but when I got when I was 7, shortly after WrestleMania 7,
Hmm.
by one of my mom's best friends had a son who was older than me. He was like 15 or 16. And so he would like press slam me onto his waterbed, and he threw me, and I lawn darted onto this waterbed, like landed face first. And like if you think a waterbed, you hit in the middle of it, all the water whooshes up, and just the my face hit like the box, the wood box spring, and like the impact was hard enough that it split my lip open. So
Nasty.
I had to get like 2 or 3 stitches as a 7 year old. My mom passed out in the emergency room when they put the anesthesia, the needle into my lip, seeing her only child with a big fat needle in his lip. So, um, and then like something like 21 years later, I was wrestling St. Louis independent wrestler Davey Vega.
Mm,
Um, and speaking of my wife, she just texted me. Sorry.
no worries.
And I was wrestling Davey Vega on a backyard show here in Vancouver, and this was when like Young Bucks were like king shit in PWG, and everyone was watching those PWG trailers and stealing like the cool like highlights and spots on like independent shows and backyard shows. And so Vega did the Nick Jackson springboard off the middle rope, dive over the adjacent top rope into a DDT on the apron. But the ring that we were on, the padding wasn't big enough to cover the entire surface area of the ring, and it had been pulled over to one side more than the other. So the apron that I was standing on didn't have any padding; it was just wood. And I think when Nick Jackson does it, he tries to land on his feet
Hmm.
on the floor, and Vega basically just went straight to his like his butt, and so he basically like his entire body weight just like drove me down onto this hardwood
Brutal.
and busted open the other side of my top lip. And I think I got 5 or 6 stitches in that one. So there's the matching. If you ever see me in person and are watching this and you notice the matching scars, that's the story of the matching upper lip scars. So
You mentioned Crazy Bumps, which is, of course, a trademark of the backyard wrestling scene. And you shared with me what you said was your favorite backyard wrestling MV, which is the Best of Backyard Wrestling 2006.
6, yeah.
I'll put the link in chat later so that people can check it out. The thing I noticed about this, though, before we talk about your memories of backyard wrestling, is that MV is set to Meatloaf's "I Will Do Anything for Love." I
Yes.
recently made an MV for 6995 set to Celine Dion's version of It's All Coming Back to Me Now.
Hmm.
As a music guy, what do you think it is about Jim Steinman's music that pairs so well with pro wrestling?
I don't know. I'd like to see more of it, honestly. It's very funny you bring up Jim Steinman because there was a double feature. There's an old single screen like cult movie theater here in Vancouver called the Rio
Mm-hmm.
that I like to go to. And I quite often will go to movies with Bambi Hall, local pro wrestler. And there was a double feature on Wednesday night, The Warriors and Streets of Fire. And Streets of Fire, a lot of the music in that movie is by Jim Steinman.
Oh, wow.
And the sound. If you've never seen the movie or heard the soundtrack, it's great. But anyways, I don't know. It's melodrama. I think that just kind of like really suits. It's funny because like most of the music videos from that era is not set to that kind of stuff. Like it's a lot of. I mean, I made a lot of music videos for our backyard stuff, and it was mostly set to like hardcore and punk kind of stuff a lot of the time. Um, and I think it was the ones where people would be like, no, let's set something to something otherwise. Those are
Yeah.
the videos that everyone remembers. Like, oh, do you remember? Like, there's a really good video from a show that we had in Ohio that had a bunch of people who went on to do like pro stuff that was set to tag teams. Whoop, there it is. Like the
Whoa, okay.
early 90s, like radio hip hop hit. And that's like one of my favorite videos that I've ever been in. And it's like, again, it's not new metal or punk or whatever kind of more generic things you expect to see in those in that medium, right? So yeah, melodrama goes a long way, I think, and his music. That's like what it is, basically.
That's his bread and butter for sure.
Truly, truly.
One thing that stood out is in your tales of the backyard scene is that you've actually traveled pretty far for backyard wrestling. Tell me a little bit about what it was like going to England for backyard wrestling.
Yeah, we used to like, I mean, honestly, it's how I made a lot of the connections that I have or I had in like 2018, 2019 when I started to travel a little bit more for independent wrestling. Um, so we used to go to Ohio like once or twice a year, like Greater Cleveland. We traveled to Providence, Rhode Island a bunch for independent shows that were run by Drew Cordero, who now runs Beyond Wrestling. Um, we traveled to Chicago to be on backyard shows that were run by the guys who now run freelance. Um, and yeah, we would have our big kind of what they were referred to as super shows, right? So you'd have like each promotion would have their like annual super show. Quite often they'd be in the summer. Although our show here in Vancouver, which was called VCW versus the World, my backyard promotion was called VCW, Van City Championship Wrestling, and VCW versus the World was usually in the spring every year, um, and people would travel from all over the world. So like, I think the record we set for fly-ins for one of them was like 17. Like people flying from all over the US, Canada, England, Australia. I don't think anyone came from any other countries. Um, so yeah, in 2007, we had a VCW versus the World that had like 4 or 5 guys come over from England because this is like all pre-social media. So we were mostly communicating through message boards and AOL Instant Messenger, and people were like sharing media, right? You would have like your local show and make a music video of it and then post it online, and people would watch it from wherever and be like, oh, VCW in Vancouver, their shows look great. You know, I'm going to talk to these guys on AOL Instant Messenger or whatever. And then, oh, they're having a super show and anyone can come. We kind of left it open. Like it wasn't invite only or anything. It was sort of like, if you have the means to come to Vancouver for a weekend and wrestle here, like you are invited basically. Um, and so some English guys came here a couple times, and then the next year, 3 of us from here in Vancouver went to England, and then we did it again the following summer as well. Um, so they had their own like super shows in England, and they had a couple because there was, you know, like probably like 8 or 10 promotions in England, and they would travel because England's a much smaller country than Canada or the United States, obviously. Um, so they would have their like convoys to whatever parts of the country. But then they had this big one every year in a town called Aylesbury, which is about 45 minutes to an hour outside of London. And it was called Heat Fest. And it was 3 or 4 days in the guy who ran it, his name was Nodder, and his father had this like restaurant slash resort that had like a lot of land, and a lot of it was just unused. So he bought his son a wrestling ring and was just like, yeah, you can have your friends come and like camp out in a field and have 3 days of wrestling in on my property. So that's what we did. So we went to Aylesbury uh back to back summers, and um you know, it was like a real mishmash of ages. Like by the time we were going there, we were in our early 20s, but there were people there who were teenagers. You know, because there was different feds of varying ages, you know. And obviously the most famous person who I met there was Will Ospreay. And he would have been 15 or 16 maybe then. Um, and other guys who went on to do other stuff in the UK Indies and beyond. Flash Morgan Webster was there. Wild Boar, like guys who ended up in, you know, NXT UK or whatever. Um, I'm trying to think if I'm forgetting anyone, but yeah, crazy that we did that, and we would usually like we'd go and wrestle for like 3 days, and then we would stay for a week and do like tourist stuff as
For
well.
sure.
So yeah.
That's that's wild to me that it's always kind of crazy to me to hear stories of that sort of era of backyard wrestling and the reach that it had and sort of the influence it still has on like modern day pro wrestling. Do you know what I mean? Like some of the
It's
names you mentioned.
crazy. It's crazy to me. Like it's, there's people who are like, I had a friend who I was talking to earlier today who was like, man, we looked up to you guys when we were teenagers, and then we got to meet you, and you guys were like cool to us, and like now it's been a decade or whatever, and we're still friends, and we, talk and see each other. Like a friend of mine, Ryan, who I backyarded with, who's from New Jersey, and when I was in New York for WrestleMania 5 years ago, doing indie stuff, like we went to a baseball game together, so like we're still, there's the connections that we made 10, 15, 20 years ago, like some of them are still running pretty deep. It's just crazy. It's really nice, especially like we don't have to talk too much about this because it's not a nice subject, but like obviously one of my oldest friends and the person who I broke into the industry with, Scott Henson, passed away 3 weeks ago now. And the amount of people from all over the globe who I've met through backyard and independent wrestling who have reached out to talk about Scott and like his impact on their life and just check in on me and see how I'm doing. It's crazy. It's mind boggling. Just the effect. I mean, it's the formative years of life, right? When you're a kid, right? And that's the stuff that you remember forever, hopefully.
Um, if you're comfortable speaking about it, you can feel free to not. Um, what are your memories of that final match with Scott? That tag match that you had?
Um, what are your memories of 3 weeks ago? Um, I'm really, I mean, it was special. It was really special. Like it wasn't my best match ever. I think it was a good match though. Um, but it was fun, and it was reminiscent of just what we used to do, both when we would do indie stuff together, like in 321 or wherever, or like dating back to backyarding. There's no one else that I've wrestled as much as I've wrestled him. From 2001 to 2019, 19 consecutive years, we were in a match together, at least one match every year for 19 straight years, and sometimes multiple, right? So, but it was the first time we had wrestled since before the pandemic. And so, yeah, it was just special getting to reconnect and just like, it was just like, oh, this is how we used to always do it. It's just wrestling. Sometimes I take wrestling too seriously, probably. And I think you have to, if you want to get like really good, you do have to take it seriously. And sometimes that can be detrimental to your own like mental health. Like, don't get me wrong, like I still have fun wrestling, but I like people always ask me um, like, are you enjoying yourself, or like are you able to enjoy yourself like in the moment? And I usually, the moment where I have like the most just like joy and like remembrance of why I do this and why this is good is like after a match is done and everything was good. Like I can tell when a match is good. I'll go through the curtain and I'll be like, yes, that was good. I know that was good. No one is coming back here and telling me that wasn't good. And then I'm overwhelmed with emotion and joy. Um, but sometimes you lose some of the fun and the enjoyment by taking yourself so seriously. And so it was nice to have fun again with my friends, no less, people that I've known for over 20 years. So,
Since you mentioned sort of your mindset going into every match, um, people who watch the Kevin Koo interview and people who just know your work can probably tell that you are very meticulous about your ring work. There's such an attention to detail. Um, is this true for you? The notepads on your phone for each match to write down ideas. That's how Koo sort of described his process, taking influence from you. Is it the same from you?
I'll tell this to anyone who, like, any worker out there, if there's anyone watching this, if you ever share a locker room with me and like you want my secret, I do have a note app on my phone that is constantly being recycled and refreshed. So at the top of it is just a list of ideas. If I get an idea, it gets plunked in there, even if it's not for a specific match or opponent or scenario or whatever. Just I'll see something in a match, or quite often I'll see stuff in, like, because there's such an influence for shoot style for me. Like, even if I'm just watching like UFC or something, like I'll get an idea and think of how I can like repurpose it into pro wrestling. Um, so I write down ideas, and then usually, like, if I know what my next two, three, four, whatever matches are, I'll have bullets for those people. And then I do a lot of tape study. Like, I will specifically reach out to opponents and say, what are recent matches of yours that you think would be appropriate for me to watch to get ideas for the kind of match that we're going to have together. And most people are very good about giving feedback on what I should watch. And then I will watch those matches and take down notes on things that those people do that I think would work well within the context of a match with me. And then I revisit the ideas I have at the top of the page and try and go, okay, do any of these make sense for this particular opponent? And maybe something will spark something that they do or I saw them do with an idea that I have, and I go, oh, there's enough of a seed there that I can base a story around that, and let's branch off of that. But that's basically, yeah, that's my system.
How did this habit start? Did someone teach it to you, or was it something you just wanted to
just came
do?
just came up with it. Just came up with it. I thought it was a good way to organize my thoughts. Um, that honestly is the worst part of retiring. My body's not going to miss it, right? Because I do need the physical act of, like, sometimes I just miss wrestling people, which feels like weird and like maybe like vaguely sexual, but like not, like I just like my body needs like that exertion,
Yes.
right? Like you just want to like I just want to fight someone or just like have resistance. Um and so I'll miss that a little bit, like, but my body's not going to miss taking bumps, right? But I'm not going to be able to turn my brain off is the problem, and I'm not going to be able to stop the ideas from happening. And I'm happy to share ideas with people. I do that sometimes. Like, things will come up and I go, oh, that's a great idea for one of the kids here in Vancouver, or this is a great idea for Koo or whoever. Um, but I'm still not at the point where I get as much or enough satisfaction from seeing other people using my ideas. Like, I would be an okay road agent, but like that's not fulfilling for me, really. I want to do I want to be the one creating and like seeing my ideas come to life, right? So that's gonna be hard, but I just got to get over it. So
When did this habit start? Is this something you would do during your backyarding days as well, or did it start more when you shifted into like pro stuff?
no, it's like that's a byproduct of uh smartphones for sure. When did I start writing down stuff? I wonder if there's a way to see how old my note app is.
There may be if
I
you
don't
just like
know.
scroll all the way back.
Yeah, maybe it's probably like the last 6 or 7 years that it's
Hmm.
been like a meticulous, like, this is how I operate kind
Yeah.
of thing. Yeah.
Where do you think that comes from? Like that attention to detail. Where does that impulse come from, you think, in regards to your work in wrestling?
I don't know. Like, I don't think I had anyone who truly influenced that. Um, it's funny, I went back, like, speaking of Scott, I've been going back and watching a lot of our matches together from backyard, which are all online, but like none of them are on YouTube. So I was going through some of the ones to try and find ones that like aren't completely embarrassing that I can post on YouTube. And my idea was to make like a playlist of like our best singles matches from the last 2 decades kind of thing. And so I watched a match of ours from shortly after we got trained. So like January of 2004, so over 20 years ago. And like the psychology and like some of the attention to detail is there already then. So um I mean, I was definitely influenced. I think the primary influence for that kind of stuff is All Japan for sure. Um, Seeing All Japan, I probably would have been 16, 17 the first time I saw All Japan. Yeah, yeah, probably 16. Um, and reading about it on places like Death Valley Driver and other, limited resources like that were writing about it and were like acknowledging that stuff, that's when my brain started to sort of like realize, oh, that's kind of what's happening. And really like that kind of like specific kind of like selling and detail like didn't really exist in like 1990s American wrestling. Not really. So um I think it just kind of like stuck in the back of my brain. It was like, okay, be like All Japan. Like that's what these guys do. They like sell stuff and like, they do lots of like revisiting ideas later on in matches. So it got burned in my brain pretty early on. Like that's a good thing to do. So
You've of course mentioned the world famous Death Valley Driver review board. Yeah, how do you look back on your time as a forum cretin? Like you talked about it a little bit there, but in what ways did it like inform your career as a pro wrestler later on?
I mean, the big influence is like I don't know that I would have gone into shoot style. Like I was watching UFC and I liked UFC from a young age. The first UFC pay-per-view that I watched was UFC 7, which was in 1995. And I think I convinced my mom that it was just pro wrestling and she didn't know any better. She's like, okay, that's fine. He watches pro wrestling already. Um, and and I was definitely more drawn to like submissions and groundwork and that sort of stuff. Although I like the brutality as well. Of course, I was an 11-year-old child who wouldn't. But so I don't, there was a root of liking shoots for sure. But I think discovering shoot style really came from reading up on. Yeah, they were talking about UWF and rings and that sort of stuff, but like they really loved battle arts, those guys. And so reading so much about how much they love battle arts and how just exciting they made it sound. And then also like seeing like Akuto Hidaka had an excursion in ECW as well. And I really liked his hybrid style of like Lucharisu junior heavyweight with the shoot influence. Like I thought that was interesting as well. So when I first started watching Battle Arts, my favorite guy there was actually Minoru Tanaka.
Oh wow.
It wasn't Ishikawa and Ikeda. Like that definitely took time to grow on me. Like I don't think I really appreciated like the stiffness or like just the intricacies of their mat work that I wanted like high spots. And Tanaka and Hidaka provided that. But in time, like I figured it out, like, oh, what these guys are doing is like just as interesting in a totally different way. And like now that's obviously more my speed. But
A question from chat. Artemis Spencer is asking, what was your name on Death Valley Driver?
I bet he's sitting there with his wife, who I've been holding this over her head for years because she didn't post on Death Valley Driver, but she posted on Crazy Max, I think. His wife's Nicole Matthews, by the way.
Of course.
I'm not telling anyone what anyone's secrets, right?
Yeah,
But
that is known.
that is known. And so I have kept that secret. Like a few people, like it's funny. The first time I ever did Between the Sheets with Chris Zellner and David Bixenspan, who were both on Death Valley Driver, I logged in to um, why my Skype. I logged into Skype with my real name,
Yes.
which isn't Daniel Makabe. Surprise, surprise. It's not that hard to find if people want to look it up. Um, and the second that Chris saw my real name, he went, "Holy shit, you're!" And he remembered my. It had been 18 years,
Hmm.
17, 18 years probably since I'd used that screen name.
Yeah.
And Chris was just like, "Oh my God, I didn't realize you were so and so." I was like, "Oh man, like how did you pull that?" But so yeah, I mean, whatever. It's not that embarrassing of a name, but it's kind of embarrassing. So I've
Yeah.
just like I've chosen not to like, and I was an annoying kid. I recognize I was
Sure.
like a 17-year-old annoying kid on the message board, like trying to be cool with all the guys in their mid to late 20s or whatever. Um,
And the
and
cycle continues forever.
Truly. So I used to say that I was gonna like whisper it in her ear after our final match, and then we had the match at dusk this past September, and I totally intended on telling her like after because I tapped out to her omoplata
Yes.
crossface, and then I was gonna tap and then like tell her, and I just totally forgot to do it. So so and I'm pretty sure she had like a really cringy screen name as well, and she's younger than me too. So like I'm sure she was as much of a brutal punisher on the internet as I was. But anyways, one day I will let her know, and in turn, she will let her husband know. But
um, since you brought her up as well, Nicole Matthews, in a recent interview with friend of the channel Squill, you named her as one of your favorite opponents, aside from, say, Thatcher and your other more famous rivals. No shade on Nicole saying that, my God. You've wrestled her 4 times now, I believe, in singles matches since
three,
2021. Three,
three,
just three. Okay, we're hoping for the
just three.
fourth. Um, yeah, tell me about the working relationship with Nicole, how that sort of translates into your ring work together.
It's funny because like we weren't really like close friends until the last since the pandemic, basically. Um, and like we've always known each other. So like our backyard fed helped get their school the building that in turn became their training school. So like we were very well organized for a bunch of 18-year-olds, and we got this building which was the school that we had trained at, but then our school went out of business. I didn't train with like the main local promotion here in Vancouver was ECCW, and we didn't train there for reasons I won't go into. But so Scott, myself, and our friend Justin, who wrestled under the name Yakuza J, who is like a cult legend in UK wrestling circles. Um, and we all trained with All Star Wrestling here in Vancouver in 2003, and then local independent wrestling kind of sucked, and we were like, let's just keep backyarding. So we managed to keep running our backyard shows mostly in a pro ring in a variety of buildings. And ECCW was out of a building for their school. They needed a new building to run their school. And they actually came to us and was like, hey, can we get in on your deal? And so we basically got them in with our guy who we were renting from. And then we ended up just using their ring for our backyard shows instead. So I've known of her or been around her since she started in the business, basically. But we really weren't that close until the last 5 years or whatever. I think part of it started with we started working a little bit more, like doors opened up a little bit. She started working for 321 in Seattle. I started getting booked a little bit more on ECCW shows. We were actually supposed to wrestle each other on an ECCW show in, I think, April or May of 2020, which obviously got canceled due to the pandemic. But that would have been our first match with one another. And then when kind of lockdown happens, and then things kind of start to open up here again, and they start running the Lionsgate Dojo here in Vancouver, which is a great facility. If anyone's in the Northwest and wants to be a pro wrestler or become a better pro wrestler, I highly recommend coming. That's where I was That's why I was late, because I was at the Lionsgate dojo. And just being around each other in the dojo so much, it was just sort of like, man, it's kind of silly that we've never wrestled each other, because her favorite pro wrestler of all time is Bryan Danielson, and my favorite pro wrestler of all time, and it's probably the Destroyer, but Danielson's number two. So, um, and so it was like, man, we really like owe it to ourselves to wrestle. And then she was actually kind of the carrot that got dangled in front of me, because there was a new local promotion here called NEW that started up in 2021, and they were recruiting local talent. And I initially was kind of hesitant to work there. I had just some precautions that just didn't, something felt a little off. And they sort of reached out to me and said, hey, you're the one guy that we really want on this show that like hasn't reached out to us. Like, would you be interested at all on working the show? And I sort of went, well, I mean, yeah, I guess. But, I just kind of was waiting to sit back a little bit and see how the first couple shows went and, whatever. And they said, well, we want you to wrestle Nicole Matthews on the first show. Okay, well, no, I'm in then. That you got me. That's all I needed. So, and then since then, I think she has said that like I kind of helped her kind of realize how she wants to wrestle. I mean, she's done so much. She's accomplished way more than I have, as far as being a world traveler and having like high profile matches and stuff. But I think she kind of forgot who she was at a certain point, and was sort of like, yeah, like I want to wrestle like the way that I want to wrestle, which is how I've always been. It's like, I don't really care what the fans think. I want to have cool matches for my own self being, And I think getting to work with me kind of helped her realize like, oh yeah, like I should just do what I want to do and like be a badass technical wrestler who is, like second to none worldwide, truly. Like she's great, and she's easy to work with. We think alike. I bounce ideas off of her, and she sort of goes, oh, like, yeah, that's perfect. And vice versa. Like we, there are very few people who I think operate in a similar kind of just mindset as me, where when you get together, it's so easy and natural. And yeah, I love wrestling her, and I'd love to have a fourth match with her if it's possible. Probably not, but yeah, one can hope.
For everybody who is curious, all three of Dan and Nicole's matches are available on YouTube for free. So check them out. I highly, highly recommend. I was a big, big fan, especially of the third one, which made my top 20 last year. So everyone check it out.
I appreciate that. I wish that the pro shot version of it existed, obviously, but I have not adequately punished Parm about losing. I mean, he didn't lose the footage, but
Sure.
but yeah. But I'm very thankful that some version of it exists, obviously.
But we also only preserved it because of Parm as well. So swings and roundabouts there.
Yeah.
Everybody go check it out, even if it's filmed from one slightly awkward angle at ringside. Still
Like,
it's like on a Dutch angle. Still one of the best matches of 2023. I guess we really should touch on this before we get to SCI. This year, you put a cap on your series with Timothy Thatcher. And how do you feel about main eventing Dean, the final match with Thatcher? Yeah, how do you look back on that series?
I kind of felt like it. I mean, like it felt like it already had a cap on it, right? We had the 3 matches in Seattle that, like escalated nicely upon themselves. Absolutely were the reason that I had as much growth as I did, not just from a like, hey, look at this guy, he can hang with Thatcher, let's book him outside of the Northwest, but also just growing as a performer personally. I think I truly owe to getting to work with him annually. So I kind of just assumed that we were done. And then Phil Schneider of Segunda Caída and Death Valley Driver reached out to me during the pandemic and said, I want to bring Ikeda and Ishikawa to America. and run a show. Will you help me? And we like had like Skype chats and tried to figure out like some of the money and where's the best place to run it. And then thankfully we talked to someone who actually understands how to run a wrestling show and got Matt Griffin of Action Wrestling on board. And there were a couple false starts where we sort of thought, WrestleMania weekend in, where maybe Dallas, and maybe the Restival, the big IWTV kind of weekend in Boston. And then it just kind of fell into place like, okay, Philadelphia, this is it. The H2O building, that's perfect. The Northeast, obviously, there's a lot of people who were around in that era and friends of Dean who are in close enough proximity to the Northeast. And then they asked me, like, who do you want? And it just kind of hit me like, this is my last year. And like, he is my most famous opponent and like truly my greatest opponent. And it's been almost 5 years. So like, let's revisit things and let's put a true cap on the feud. And I had someone reach out to me the other day who was actually buying a t-shirt, who said like, hey, it was really nice to meet you at Dean, and I really appreciate all the words you said afterwards. And, that was a really special moment for me. I hope it was a special moment for you. And I told him like, honest truth, like that's an all-timer of a memory that evening. Because I think it probably is our best match of the 5. And getting to say some words about what that community and just being a fan of wrestling, because Dean was a fan of wrestling who wanted to inspire other fans of wrestling. And I, in turn, as a 17-year-old, was inspired to go on this 20 plus year journey and end up main eventing, a show in tribute to this man, yeah, it was really special. It was really special. It's like all time top 3, 5, whatever you want to say, top moments in my career and life. Absolutely. Yeah.
Um, I think it's time we talk about the Scenic City Invitational that is coming up next week. So just to set things up, how does a wrestler who has made their name in the Pacific Northwest find a second home in the Southeast Indies? How did that come together?
Dylan Hales, 1000%. He won't take credit. He'll say it was all my doing, but like, he's the one who pulled the trigger. And Koo said it, that Dylan was the one who forced his hand and said, we're booking this guy on a sup show in Nashville, which is what happened. And then I had a good match with Jake Parnell in Nashville in November of 2018. And then literally as I was saying goodbye outside the Basement East in Nashville, Dylan said, I don't care if I have to pay for the flight myself. You're going to be in SCI next year. Like, keep that weekend open. And SCI, it's so funny how things could have turned out differently too. I think I was always supposed to wrestle Tony Deppen in the first round, who's someone else I've known, forever, a fellow backyarder, who I first met when he was really young, 17, 18. We were on a show together in like rural Pennsylvania. And, but we had never gotten to wrestle before. And so he's someone I knew that I could work with. And then as luck should have it, I had a bunch of flight delays, travel delays. I didn't get to the building until after the show had started. And then he took me aside and was like, who cares, man? We both can wrestle. Let's just go out there and wrestle and like throw a couple big spots in at the end. And it's like one of my like favorite memories of like winning over a crowd with your work, which is like something that wrestlers talk about all the time, but like doesn't necessarily happen all the time. You can get a cold crowd who is not familiar with you. And then the fact, if you can win them over within the span of like 13 minutes or whatever it was, like it wasn't that long of a match, to at the point you're getting a standing ovation for like a European clutch finish. I mean, that's pretty amazing. Scott Hensley, who is one of the co-promoters of SCI and the ring announcer for SCI, on one of the trips, because I've been to Chattanooga a lot now, on one of the trips, he said something like, "Oh, it's always so nice to see you," and the match was great and people loved it and whatever, whatever. And I said, "Man, it still is just wild to me, Scott, that this technical wrestler from Western Canada has just become accepted as one of the South Zone and Chattanooga Zone. When you think of me, you don't really think of like Southern Gaga." And he said, "Yeah, but you're a storyteller. First and foremost, you're a storyteller, and that's people here want stories, and they want, doesn't matter what the story is as long as it's captivating and it's told well." And I think, that's as good a reason as any that it's just become my home away from home, basically. Yeah.
Um, so why Kevin Koo?
Um, I think, well, he is genuinely someone that I've met through wrestling who has become a very close friend of mine. He's someone that I talk to on a nearly daily basis, even if it's just to check in and see how he's doing. What are you up to today? Going to the gym? Okay, cool. Like, see you tomorrow, whatever. Send each other clips. I send him all sorts of, he told you, but I send him just like gross bumps that I see on Twitter. It's like occasionally I'll send him like, "Hey, this is a cool submission or something you could do." But most of the time it's like, "Hey, look at this crazy thing that none of us want to do. Neither of us should do."
Yeah.
Um, and yet he was a groomsman in my wedding a few months ago. Um, and I always loved, like, Sup is like, I miss Sup so much. It was just such a blast working in Nashville, and I just have such a strong connection to it because they were the first indie to ever book me outside of the Northwest. And there's other similarities. Obviously, like, we're both into a lot of the same music, and we're both straight edge still into our, like, he's in his late 30s and I'm 40 now, which is not as common. And so there's a connection there for sure on a personal level. And then on just like on a wrestling level, I've always loved our match that we had at Sup in January of 2020. And it only goes like maybe 13, 14 minutes. It's a nice length for a match for sure. And we were somewhere in the middle of the card too. But I just felt like he has subsequently gotten so much better, especially as a singles wrestler. Like, him and Dom have been a good tag team for a very long time, but like the Coup singles run, especially in 2022 with, you watched it all, you wrote all about it. But the Uncharted Territory run and his run as the, action heavyweight champion and all that stuff really kind of awakened like a new level of Coup. And I just thought, who better to have my final match with than someone who's from the South, who everyone's very familiar with in the South, who I first met working on shows in the South. He was in the same SCI that I was in back in 2019. And who I think has grown exponentially as a wrestler. And I hope that we can produce something that, matches or betters what we did in 2020. It just felt like a natural fit, and I wanted it to be at SCI. That felt like the right place for me to retire for sure.
What are your favorite Kevin Koo matches?
Oh boy. Let me see if I can get some deep cuts. There's a bunch of them from Action that are really good from the pandemic. He has a really good match with Fred Yehai from Action. He had a really good match with Logan Easton LaRue from Action. At that SCI where 2019, his night to, I guess it's technically a semifinal versus Warhorse is really good. Let me think. What are good matches of his that he's had in Sup? There's a really good singles match he had with Brandon Williams. That's kind of an under the radar. Like it's like an 8 or 9 minute kind of undercard match, but like that's a guy who works kind of like a shooty style that Ku really worked well with. Um, God, there's got to be more. I mean, tag matches. It's the astronauts tag from earlier this year. It's the match with Abe and Irie from WXW. What other tag matches of theirs do I really like? Feel kind of put on the spot. I just mentioned like 6 or 7 matches. That's
Yeah,
good
that's
enough.
true.
But he's
What goes into preparing for the final match?
I've been doing a lot of cardio, man. I've been doing a lot of cardio. Like it's funny, like I think my sweet spot for matches is like 14 to 16 minutes. I always used to say that to people, especially like when I was kind of on my run in like 2018, 2019. That was Gresham, Yehai, Thatcher, like they were all in that kind of ballpark. And then this year, like I don't know if maybe I'm just getting overindulgent or slower, or I don't know, but like
All the bloggers are in the chat. Don't tell them that out loud.
but like the Thatcher match goes 20, and the Zach match goes over 20, and like I have a strong suspicion that the last couple matches are going to be in that 20-minute ballpark, just so I can get everything out of me.
Sure.
Like I still got a lot of ideas that I got to use, and
Gotta finish up the notepad.
got to finish up the notepad, and then I guess I can gift them to some people. So, but like I've been working on my cardio a lot this year because I've been preparing to wrestle Zack Sabre for like 7 years, and in like 2019 I'd given up hope that it was ever going to happen. But like I have, for someone who like doesn't appear to be in very good physical shape, I've got really good mobility in my joints and my shoulders, and that was like I stretch a lot, and it's like specifically so I didn't like tear a ligament wrestling Zack Sabre. And then knock on wood, it didn't happen, but it came in handy. But also having really good cardio for wrestling Sabre and Thatcher came in handy. And I have the school being so close to me is a godsend. Like I live in good traffic, like 8 minutes from the wrestling school here. And then I've got like some of the best up and coming young independent wrestlers in North America here who want to work with me. And I'm so thankful. Like they want to learn from me, and I want to exploit them for their youth and energy and get them to
Yeah.
put me through the ringer, basically. So, like this week alone, in the last 3 days, I've been at the school with Elliot Tyler and Travis Williams, just wrestling. We just go in and we just wrestle until we're tired. And the best way to improve your gas tank for wrestling is by wrestling. So,
so you're 1 week away now. Scenic City Invitational, July 12th. It will be streaming live on IWTV for anyone who wants to catch that.
potentially right? Potentially to the minute.
Wow.
It's like 10:30 Eastern
yes.
right now. And that's probably about the time that we will be in the ring 1 week from today.
You guys will be main eventing, is that right?
Yeah, we're the main event. Give me a break. Come
on. They know what's up down in SCI.
And I specifically, like, they're really good at listening to my ideas. Like, I've pitched ideas to them before. Like, I had a match that I really enjoyed, SCI 2021, on TWE the night before. I wrestled Damian Tangra in a match that I thought was really good and helped kind of get him out there a little bit. And then the next night, or maybe 2 nights later, he won like the scramble, and they announced him as the first entrant in SCI the following year. And literally that night, I took them aside and I said, "Rematch me with Tangra in round 1 next year, and I'll put him over next year." And they went, "Oh, that's a good idea." And I called my shot a year in advance. So this one, I called my shot like 7-8 months in advance. I said, "Hey, I want to have my final match at SCI. but put us on night one so we don't overshadow
The
the
final.
tournament
Yeah.
or the final. And you have to put us on last in a non-tournament match. And they said, yeah, we'll do it. So
Beautiful. I can't wait to see it. So that will be on IWTV. But yeah, we're a week out, perhaps down to the minute. What is the emotional state now? Like how are you feeling? Looking forward to it, looking back on your career.
I'm really looking forward to it. It still feels like longer than a week, honestly. It's crazy, but it feels like months away still. I've wanted it to come for months now. My wife, every time I bring up like, hey, I wish that we were in July, she goes, no, don't say that because like you're gonna miss out on all this stuff along the way. And I've had a lot of cool stuff along the way. Like this year, I've had a really good year. I better be an honorable mention in the video at the end of the year. I'm just
You have
telling.
a shot at 20, if we're being
I
honest.
think I've got a shot in the lower half of 20.
Sure, yeah.
But especially in a output over
Input
whatever
over output, yeah.
input over output ratio. Like I think I'm only gonna end up with like 16 matches or something by the end of the year. But like
People have
a
made it with
good
less.
2/3 of those matches are ending up on the list. So
Sure, yeah.
so but anyway, it still feels like it's forever from now, but I'm genuinely really excited for it. I'm excited to wrestle my friend in front of a lot of friends, people I haven't seen in a while, some people I've never met. There's a lot of people traveling from all over the place for this. I think it's going to be a really special night for sure. Um, I've had ideas written down on that notepad for this match for months and months and months. And so I'm ready to finally execute the damn things. Um, and um, and honestly, like, especially now, just like everything in hindsight and like with the, you know, losing someone uh, in the world of wrestling who's so close to me in the last month, that really kind of expedited the process where like there was a life lessons learned from that, like wrestling is important. I truly owe my life to it. I met my wife because of wrestling. I've gotten to travel the world and meet some amazing friends because of wrestling and do so much just crazy stuff. Like I said, cherry on top. The last 5 years, especially, never in a million years. If you told me when I was a 17-year-old wrestling on a trampoline in Scott Henson's parents' backyard, the amount of cool things that I would get to do, I would have called you a liar for sure. But now it just feels like now is the time to go, and I'm glad that we're here, and I hope it lives up to everyone's expectations.
Last question, before we sort of figure out what we do next.
Yeah.
What role has your wife played in your life for this final year in pro wrestling?
First and foremost is supporter. At sometimes it's with hesitance for sure, because, and I recognize it's not because she doesn't want me to have these moments or these experiences, but she's just concerned for my health and well-being. And she was a wrestling fan before I met her, and like a pretty like deep head. Like her favorite promotions were New Japan and Ring of Honor in like the early 2010s before I met her. So like she was into some cool stuff for sure. And like Zack Sabre was her favorite wrestler, and she was embarrassingly giddy as a schoolgirl when she got to meet Zack Sabre. But it was very sweet, and he was very sweet. Until she noticed the mark he left on my neck by roundhouse kicking me. And the next morning, the bruise started forming and my ear turned purple. And she freaked out, saying, "Oh my God, what happened?" And I said, "Your boyfriend kicked me in the head. What do you think happened?" But yeah, so first and foremost is supporter for sure. And she's coming to Chattanooga with me. So she's going to be there. Please don't punish her. She doesn't really like being in social settings if anyone's watching and they recognize her as my wife. But yeah, that's a big one for sure. She it's not always been easy because she worries so much. And I've definitely made being a wrestling fan less fun for her because I've exposed all of the secrets and she sees me when I'm hurt. So it's not just a show she watches on TV or in person, because she would go to local indies, right? But yeah, but still through all of it, she stuck by my side and agreed to marry me. And have a bunch of scarred up wrestlers in our wedding party, and fly to Chattanooga with me to. I don't know if she realizes how hot it's going to be in Chattanooga too. She does not do well with the heat, and it's going to be like in the 90s in humid, or like mid 30s for us Celsius folks. So, but yeah, I love her and I appreciate her, and I'm glad that she took some convincing for her to come around and realize that I needed to go out on my terms, not just because of extenuating circumstances. But once she kind of realized that, now she's on board. So
Hell yeah, Daniel Makabe versus Kevin Koo. It's the final match next week, July 12th. Scenic City Invitational 2024, night 1. Yeah, what a lineup as well for the tournament, by the way, before we head out. Very excited to see Mad Dog.
Mad Dog and Tank. I'm stoked for that.
As a massive Mad Dog disciple, holy shit. So thrilled to see him in SCI. Dan, thank you so much for joining us on the stream today.
Awesome.
We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
I had a good time. I hope you enjoyed your time with us as well. Is there any parting words, anything you'd like to plug? Final plugs, I guess, for Dan's wrestling career.
Yeah, I will just say thank you for everyone who has supported me and follows me. If you don't already follow me on Twitter or Instagram, it's at Daniel Makabe. That's where you'll find out about my final wrestling matches, and then whatever I'm doing beyond that. I play music in a couple different bands that have some things that will be coming out very soon, actually, and some shows for anyone in the Northwest that are coming up. And then I also just like to shine up my friends and like put over my friends' wrestling and promotions and whatever. So yeah. SCI is a week from tonight, 6 nights from tonight. TWE the night before, I'm wrestling Darian Bankston, which will also be live on IWTV. So check that out as well. And if you're in the Southeast, or you feel like hopping on a plane, like some friends of ours, Timothy from QNTR will be in the house, as well as people are flying from Germany, people are flying from Japan. It's just truly humbling for someone like me who is, like I said, this is all beyond my wildest imaginations. So yeah, I'm really thankful, and having just watched that match with Koo, I think we can do better.
For more from Daniel Makabe, including him sticking around to watch a 6-man tag from the California Indies in the 90s, as well as his first ever match with Kevin Koo, feel free to check out the complete video-on-demand copy of this stream over on twitch.tv/JosephWeirdness. Thank you for joining us.